what happened was that I was writing this latest book, and I sat down one morning. I've had one or two thoughts about this before, but they've come and gone. But I sat down one morning at the computer to start writing, and it was like, I've had this so many times in my life, in the last 20 years. It was like an energy field descends upon me, and suddenly I just knew the moon was not what it seems to be. It wasn't the heavenly body, the natural phenomenon that we believe that it is. And from that moment, information started to come to me in the five-sense world, pointing to exactly that. Again, we come back to that line 20 years ago. Knowledge will be put into his mind, and at other times he will be led to knowledge. This combination has been constantly repeating, and it gets more and more powerful. First, I get an insight out of nowhere. The moon's not real. Where's that come from? And then suddenly it starts. I went on the internet, and within 2-3 minutes, I was expecting to find nothing. I just put on a few words indicating the moon's not real in the sense that we think it is. And bingo, within 2-3 minutes or less, I'd found this book, Who Built the Moon, by two researchers who've written other books. One of them an investigation into Freemasonry. And this book details the extraordinary anomalies relating to the moon. And they came to the conclusion, and I absolutely bloody agree with them, and a bit more than that too, as I'll come to later, that this is what we're looking at. The geometrical connections and everything, and the mathematics and the relationship between them in terms of size and position is just mind-blowing. And what I'm suggesting, and I'm not alone over the years at this level of it, though I think I might be alone at the next bit, that I'll come to in a second or a few minutes. I've been there before, I don't mind. Is that the moon is actually a hollowed-out planetoid by a very, very advanced race, and it was brought here to take the Earth over. And what they do, this seems to be a modus operandi. They bring these moons in, and as they bring them in, they fundamentally affect the Earth. I mean, the Earth is at the spin it is, and is at the angle it is, because of the moon. Massively so, anyway, because of the moon. So when they come in, bingo, things change, and the society that was there before ain't there anymore. And then gradually they take them over in ways that I'll come to. So when the moon came in, and again, it's so important to come back from the holographic world to the base construct. We see a solid moon, yes, in the play-out world. But back here, it is an energetic construct in the metaphysical universe. And as it came in, and other things that happened, which I talk about in the book, it created this distortion in the information construct of the waveform information base of this universe. And as it did so, it was played out here in all this catastrophe and stuff that I talked about and the ancients talk about. It was played out as this great geological catastrophe and the great flood and all the rest of it. And what is a common theme that they talk about, the ancients, in relation to this? The earth turned over. And you think, how the fricking hell can the earth turn over? Well, what happened? What happened when the moon came in, the earth turned over? It's at an angle that it is today because of the moon. And so the distortion brought an end to the world that was there before, and we basically went back to rubbing sticks together because of what happened. And that distortion was played out in the human mind, the human perception, the human psyche, and we completely changed our perception of the world and who we are, where we are. So in Who Built the Moon, like I say, I do recommend it, the way it looks at the anomalies and everything, and the connections between these three bodies. And these mathematical, geometrical connections only apply to these three bodies in the solar system. They don't play out against the other planets, just these three. And the moon is so perfectly positioned that because of where it is, when we have an eclipse, it is the same size as the sun. That's why we have the eclipse. And the authors of Who Built the Moon say this: the moon is bigger than it should be, apparently older than it should be, and much lighter in mass than it should be. It occupies an unlikely orbit and is so extraordinary that all existing explanations for its presence are fraught with difficulties, and none of them could be considered remotely watertight. When you go on and you say, where'd the moon come from, you get this story. And like so much in what we call science, that people take it as fact, it's actually a theory which repeated becomes fact. But then you go back and you find that it's the theory. And the first one is the moon was created by what's known as the whack theory, or the big whack theory. And that is that a Mars-type planet came in, smacked the Earth, great chunk came off, and became the moon. When the physics of that didn't work out, they came up with the double whack theory, where the Mars-type planet hit the Earth, bit comes off or whatever, and then the Mars-type planet thinks, well, I'll give him one with the right, I'll give you one with the left, comes back and whacks it again, the old one too. Talk about bloody desperate. And the truth is, and honest scientists will tell you, they have no bloody clue where the moon come from, and it shouldn't, by physics, be there. This guy, Isaac Asimov, a Russian professor of biochemistry, did a lot of writing on this sort of stuff, and he said this, quite rightly: we cannot help but come to the conclusion that the moon by rights ought not to be there. The fact that it is one of those strokes of luck almost too good to accept. Small planets such as Earth with weak gravitational fields might well lack satellites. In general, then, when a planet does have satellites, those satellites are much smaller than the planet itself. Therefore, even if the Earth has a satellite, there would be every reason to suspect that at best it would be a tiny world, perhaps 30 miles in diameter. But that is not so. Earth not only has a satellite, but it is a giant satellite, 2,160 miles in diameter. How is it then that that tiny Earth has one? Amazing. Some scientists don't even talk about a planet-satellite relationship, but a planet-planet relationship. The moon's bigger than Pluto. The best explanation for the moon is observational error. The moon doesn't exist, that scientist said. Another one from NASA: it seems easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than its existence. And then we get the hollow moon. This is what I'm saying, and others have said, is that it's a hollowed-out planetoid. In November 1969, the moon was hit by a lunar module to the equivalent of 1 ton of TNT. The shock waves built up, and NASA scientists said the moon rang like a bell. Maurice Ewing, a co-director of the seismic experiment, told the news conference, "As for the meaning of it, I'd rather not make an interpretation right now, but it is as though someone had struck a bell, say in the belfry of a church, a single blow, and found that the reverberation from it continued for 30 minutes. It got a bigger smack eventually, which I'll come to. Frank Press from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, said that for a rather small impact to produce an effect that lasted for 30 minutes was quite beyond the range of our experience. This is a guy called Gordon MacDonald. He said in the early 1960s, it would seem that the moon is more like a hollow than a homogeneous sphere. And this guy from MIT said the lunar orbiter experiments had vastly improved knowledge of the moon's gravitational field and indicated the frightening possibility that the moon might be hollow. Now we'll come to this bigger whack. A launch vehicle struck the moon with the equivalent of 11 tons of TNT, and NASA scientists said the moon reacted like a gong and continued to vibrate for 3 hours and 20 minutes to a depth of up to 25 miles. Ken Johnson, a supervisor of the Data and Photo Control Department during the Apollo missions, told Who Built the Moon author Alan Butler that the moon not only rang like a bell, but the whole moon wobbled in such a precise way that it was almost as though it had gigantic hydraulic damper struts inside it. These two Russian scientists from the Soviet Academy of Scientists wrote an article in 1970 in Sputnik magazine in Russia, headed, "Is the Moon the Creation of an Alien Intelligence?" And all these years later, it indicates to the fact that they were right. What they point out, and others point out, is the outer surface of the moon is extremely hard and contains minerals like titanium. Moon rocks have been found to contain processed metals, including brass and mica, and the elements uranium-236 and neptunium-237 that have never been found to occur naturally. Uranium-236 is a long-lived radioactive nuclear waste and is found in spent nuclear fuel and reprocessed uranium. Neptunium-237 is a radioactive metallic element and a byproduct of nuclear reactors and the production of plutonium. Some lunar rocks have been found to contain 10 times more titanium than titanium-rich rocks on Earth. Titanium is used in supersonic jets, deep-diving submarines, and spacecraft. Dr. Harold Urey, the winner of the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, said he was terribly puzzled by the rocks from the moon, and in particular their titanium content. He said the samples were mind-blowers and that he could not account for the titanium. The two Russian scientists said in their article, if a material had to be devised to protect a giant artificial satellite from the unfavourable effects of temperature from the cosmic radiation and meteorite bombardment, the experts would probably have hit upon precisely these refractory metals. Refractory metals are incredibly resistant to heat and wear. In that case, is it not clear why lunar rock is such an extraordinarily poor heat conductor, a factor which so amazed the astronauts? Wasn't that what the designers of this super Sputnik of the Earth were after? From the engineer's point of view, this spaceship of ages long past, which we call the Moon, is superbly constructed. They say it's a hollowed-out planetoid, and they say if you're going to launch an artificial Sputnik, then it is advisable to make it hollow. At the same time, it would be naive to imagine that anyone capable of such a tremendous space project would be satisfied simply with some kind of giant empty trunk hurled into a near-Earth trajectory. It is more likely that what we have here is a very ancient spaceship, the interior of which was filled with fuel for the engines and materials and appliances for repair work, navigation instruments, observation equipment, and all manner of machinery. In other words, everything necessary to enable this caravel of the universe to serve as a Noah's Ark, appropriate, of intelligence, perhaps even as the home of a whole civilization, envisaging a prolonged thousands of millions of years existence and long wanderings through space, thousands of millions of miles. Naturally, the hull of such a spaceship must be super tough in order to stand up to the blows of meteorites and sharp fluctuations between extreme heat and extreme cold. Probably the shell is a double-layered affair. The basis is a dark armouring of about 20 miles in thickness, and outside of it some kind of more loosely packed covering, a thinner layer averaging about 3 miles. In certain areas where the lunar seas and craters are, the upper layer is quite thin, in some cases non-existent. And as this scientist said, the moon is made inside out. In other words, what's on the outside should really be on the inside, and that supports the idea of a hollowed-out planetoid. So, when I started to put this together, and there's a lot more of this in the new book, I then called the oracle in South Africa, Creda Mutwa, and I found Zulu legends to be incredibly accurate with their symbolism. And this is the thing, symbolism. You get these anthropologists and people, they go around and they look at these shamans and these ancient stories, and they take the blooming things literally. Now, like I said earlier, we now have the tools which make it easier for us, because technology is mirroring reality, therefore we have the analogies. When these ancient stories were put together, they didn't have that. They had to try to get their point across in simple ways that people of that time could relate to. So they used symbolism. So when I read Arang Creda Mutwa, I didn't tell him anything that I'd put together or come across or thought. I just said to him, can you tell me any Zulu legends about the moon? And he said, yes, we consider the moon to be an egg. Now, when you take that literally, you say, the moon's an egg, the anthropologists, the primitive people you know. But no, they symbolize it as an egg for a reason. And this is what he said. The legends, the Zulu legends, say that the moon was brought here hundreds of generations ago by two brothers, Wawani and Umpanku, who were the leaders of the Chitahuri. They were known as the Water Brothers and had, quote, scaly skin like a fish. Now, this story relates almost exactly to the stories found on ancient clay tablets in what is now Iraq, Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki, a non-human race, I would say reptilian race, that came to the earth in the same way that other parts of the world, in the ancient world, talk about. And the Anunnaki, according to these accounts, were led by two brothers called Enki and Enlil. And at least one of them, Enki, was symbolized under another name too as in relation to water, exactly the same as this. Zulu legends tell of how Wawani and Mpanku stole the moon in the form of an egg, and this is why they symbolize an egg, not because they're primitive, from the great fire dragon and emptied out the yolk until it was hollow. They then rolled the moon across the sky to the earth and caused cataclysmic events on this planet. Zulu legends also say that the Chitahuri threatened to move the moon if humans didn't do what they said because of the devastation that would cause. What the two scientists said about this 2-3 mile outer kind of protection, followed by a 20-mile impregnable layer, explains one of the anomalies of the moon, which the craters are pretty much of universal depth. Even though the scale of the impact and the size of the crater can be massively different, the depth is about the same, really, within a very short ratio. And that's, the scientists say, because it goes into the outer layer, the kind of buffer, but it can't go further than this inner protection layer that is impregnable. This guy, Don Wilson, wrote a book in the 70s called Our Mysterious Spaceship Moon. And these are some of the anomalies that he lists, and there are others that can be explained by what we're talking about. Why the moon is a freak world, too big and too far out to be a natural satellite of Earth. Why the moon has such shallow craters. Why some moon rocks are older than Earth and as old, at least, as the solar system. Why the moon seems inside out. Why the moon vibrates like a huge gong, transmitting tremors great distances around and through itself. How the moon can produce so many contradictions of data and findings. And I think it was in 2001, there was a series of people who spoke at the National Press Club in Washington who were insiders of government projects and space projects, etc., who came out to give evidence on things that they saw and were covered up and have never come to light. And one of them was this man, Sergeant Carl Wolfe. He was a precision electronics photographic equipment engineer based at the Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. That's the CIA Air Force Base. One of the planes in 9/11 flew out of that and never got there, weren't meant to. But what he told at the press club was that he was called across to part of this base where they were putting together what they called mosaics. As the craft were flying over the moon and photographing it, they were taking different photographs and piecing them together to complete the landscape. And they had a technical problem, so he went over to try to help them out with it. And then a guy there who was working with his mosaics showed him something of interest. And this is what he said at that presentation in Washington. Then he pulled out one of these mosaics and showed this base, which had geometrical shapes that were towers. They were spherical buildings, they were tall towers and things that looked somewhat like radar dishes, but they were large structures. If I compare it to what I have seen now, because I do have photographs that have artifacts in them that are similar to what I saw, they're massive. And this is a thing, you think about the moon, massive. This is a thing that comes up. The structures and technology and, if you like, spaceships that these people work with, some of them are absolutely enormous, beyond our comprehension, because they've crossed that Rubicon of understanding how reality works and therefore what possibility is. Some of these structures are half a mile in size. They're huge structures. Some of the buildings seem to have very reflective surfaces on them. A couple of structures that I saw reminded me of cooling towers at power generating plants. They had that sort of shape. Some of them were just very, very straight and tall with a flat top. Some of them were round. Some of them looked like Quonset huts and with a dome, a kind of like a greenhouse. The particular shot that I saw, there were several clustered together over the landscape, a fairly large landscape. And other people at that press club presentation talked about how NASA systematically smudged out or removed any non-natural artifacts that they showed on the surface of the moon. And this documentary called Moon Rising, you can watch it on YouTube, I think, looked at photographs taken by something called the Clementine mission in 1994, I think it was, which took 1.8 million photographs, digital photographs of the moon. And you see the way that some things on the landscape were just blocked out. I mean, what's behind this? There's loads of these things which they've blocked them out. And then there's this, which has been smudged out. If you take it from another angle, there it is. What the heck is that? One of the kind of astounding things in this documentary is that they said they took this picture to a photographic expert who's worked with NASA, and he estimated that this was 10 times the size of Los Angeles. Because you're dealing with phenomenal understanding of how to create this technology because of the understanding of reality. And whatever it is, it certainly doesn't seem to be natural. You've got all these other things kind of smudged out, and you can only see even the smudging in close-up. And what I came across when I was putting this together is the Death Star in Star Wars. Now, George Lucas, as I've been saying in my books for years, is a massive insider in a galaxy far, far away. I don't think so. I don't think so. This is much closer to home. And, of course, in the Star Wars movies, the Death Star it looks very much, of course, like the moon, and it was constructed to move in on planets and take them over in the same bloody way that I'm talking about in relation to the moon, and there's more to know too. In many ways, this is so symbolic of what we're looking at here, and that's no accident with George Lucas involved. And interestingly, this is Mimas, a genuine moon of Saturn, and there's the Death Star. I found that quite interesting when you put them together. Anyway, there was also talk, and more recently there's been further talk in the last few weeks, that one of the moons of Mars, Phobos, is a hollowed-out asteroid. This guy said a long time ago, in '63, chief of applied mathematics at NASA, that Phobos might be a colossal base orbiting Mars, and like I say, that's come back into the debate that it could be. And again, one of the Star Trek episodes was about a hollowed-out planetoid that became, in effect, a spacecraft, a world, and inside it. And so much of this science fiction that puts this stuff in our face as fiction ain't fiction at all. They're getting it from fact. So, like I say, there's not just incredible synchronicity in mathematics and size and position between these three bodies, but as the authors of Who Built the Moon point out, there's great synchronicity between things like Stonehenge and other megalithic structures and these three bodies, particularly the moon. And one of the things they point out is that the measurement, which a guy called Alexander Thom came up with, an engineer who studied all these sites in Britain and Europe, like Stonehenge, called the megalithic yard, which is a kind of a certain length. And he said that all these major, especially Stonehenge and things like that, broke down into these megalithic yard mathematics. And what the authors of this book are saying is that the moon breaks down to the same mathematics, which is what they say. This all seemed very odd. The megalithic structures that were built across Western Europe were frequently used to observe the movements of the sun and the moon. But how could the unit of measure upon which these structures were based be so beautifully integer to the circumference of these bodies as well as the Earth? Well, maybe because those that built Stonehenge and these megalithic structures in the ancient world, some of which we'd struggle to build now, were also those controlling the moon. And okay, this could be controversial, but, you know, I've been known to be. I think that these structures were put there to suppress the Earth's energy grid for reasons I'll come to in a moment, because we are interacting with this energy field all the time. And how do you control all the fish at once? You control the sea they're swimming in. And the way to control humanity and suppress humanity is to suppress the energy field and the energy and information available in that field that we can access. And these fantastic structures were not done by humans alone, let's say that. Now, this is where I am probably alone for the moment. I don't think I will be forever, but there you go. When I was, I do this more in detail in the book, but I'm trying to connect dots here. What I came across when I was putting all this together, again, was something I've termed the moon matrix. The first section today is absolutely crucial to understanding how this can work. The moon matrix is a broadcast frequency coming from the moon, which has, in effect, hacked in to the human body computer and to the virtual reality universe in general, and has created a sub-reality within the wider virtual reality. Because, I keep saying it, but it's important, we see the moon as physical, but actually its base construct, like everything else in this reality, is waveform information. And I would say, and of course I think this is going to become more obvious as the years pass, I would say the moon is actually not just what we've talked about so far, but it's an interdimensional portal through which entities and energies can come out of one reality through into this one. It's their means of entry. Its position, so perfect, as you'll see if you read not just my new book, but Who Built the Moon, its position in relation to the moon and the sun is so perfect because that has an effect on creating this sub-reality. I'm saying that this frequency is broadcast from the moon and has created a sub-reality which we are constantly decoding, and that the genetic manipulation of humanity, so widely described by the ancients, was to take this body computer and tune it in, connect it to this frequency range I'm calling the moon matrix. This is Neil Haig's concept of moonopoly. This is the world, the structure that we are experiencing. This box, recurring, round and round, limited world. And I am suggesting that we are being massively influenced. In fact, we have been turned into a hive mind by these broadcasts, which are holding us in a sense of limitation, to the point where it operates as a default mechanism. Soon as you start to awaken, if you don't keep it going and stick with it, then you'll default back, because the pressure of this moon matrix is pushing us into this tiny sense of limitation. So what virtual realities do is they basically hijack the five senses and get them to decode the information in the computer game and take it into reality. I'm saying that this moon matrix has done exactly the same, and it is part of the modus operandi of how planets are taken over in this way. Our five senses have been locked into something else, and we're decoding a fake reality. Basically, we are connected to this symbolically, which is a hive mind, which is why we are so herd-like when we weren't before. You know, and if people are going, "Whoa, okay, what?" Just stick with me, because the layers will go on. What I've been talking about today is the fact that this base vibration from the black holes goes through this cycle, and it elicits different information in the form of photons from the suns, which we decode, and the reality changes. We go through different epochs. What I'm saying is that this moon matrix has hacked in to that photon energy stream and has done what the Chinese authorities have done to the computer system in China. They have stopped us accessing vast amounts of the virtual reality universe that we used to before. Now, if anyone thinks this is fantastic, that we could see things that aren't really there and not see things that aren't there, this is a New Scientist. America has just switched from analog to digital television. In the short time of about a year that the analog frequencies are not being accessed because they're going to be filled up by other things like mobile phones, suddenly, for the first time, scientists can see and connect with radio waves from galaxies they couldn't before. Why couldn't they do it before? Because we were watching the flipping telly. Prior to the switchover in America, naturally occurring radio waves at frequencies between 700 and 800 megahertz were obscured by analog TV signals, preventing astronomers from investigating the universe using this band. The freeing up of this bandwidth is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see galaxies in this range. Now, you imagine what is capable by this high technology in blocking frequencies so we can't perceive what's there and we perceive things that aren't there. That's what this is doing, I suggest. And I'll add more detail as we go along. In effect, we're operating within a bubble, a virtual reality bubble, within the wider virtual reality universe. And it's connecting in through our crystalline receiver transmission system, same with the Earth, and creating this situation where we are decoding a world that may even not be there, who knows, but certainly is different to the world we think it is. And we go back to this more accurately now. The matrix, I would say the moon matrix, is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room. You can see it when you look out of your window and you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? You are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison. You cannot smell, taste, or touch. A prison for your mind. I would say that prison for your mind is the moon matrix, which has put us in a vibrational prison that we can only break out of by becoming conscious and therefore vibrating beyond the walls of the moon matrix, which is a frequency range. And if we're not held in that frequency range, that's why society is structured as it is, with its stress and its fear and its war and its conflict, then we start to break out of its perception prison and we start to say, bloody hell, why didn't I see this before? Because you were there, constantly decoding this thing. Now, like I was just saying, never mind what I've just said about some moon matrix, never mind that. Even by its very position, the moon is fundamentally affecting human behavior and human perception. Because the moon is affecting the Earth tilt, the Earth spin, it's affecting the Earth oceans, therefore it's affecting us. We're 60–70% water, we must be affected by it. And also, and here we come back to the importance of the first section today, it's also fundamentally affecting the endocrine system, which connects us to the chakra system, which connects us to out there, part of which is the third eye. It affects the hormones that we secrete, which fundamentally affect human behavior, human health, human perception. Not with any matrix, just by being there. And it fundamentally affects this, the pituitary and the pineal gland that give us the sixth sense ability to see beyond the five senses. And what it has done, it has shut down, in so many people, on purpose, the third eye, which in our previous pre-domination mode, we used to perceive vast areas of reality beyond which we can now. Moon comes from moon. The moon, of course, as it goes around, fundamentally affects our perception of time. We have moons because of the moon. It's a monarchy. It's a hybrid monarchy. And one of the major ways they control us, seems to be a modus operandi again, is money.